Hello and welcome to Get Yourself Optimized. I'm your host, Stephan Spencer, and today I'm so happy to have Dr. Toni Galardi with us. Toni is author of The LifeQuake Miracle, Awakening to Your True Purpose in Times of Personal and Global Upheaval. She's been a guest expert on resilience in tough economic times and health challenges, career coaching, helping people find their true purpose, national disaster expert on crisis intervention, and she's a highly accurate futurist in her predictions of world events on a wide range of regional, national, and international media outlets, including Good Day LA, Fox News, Gaia Network, ABC, AOL, Health Magazine, New York Post, Good Day San Diego, and many others. Toni, it's so great to have you on the show.
It's so great to be here.
So, first of all, let's talk about how this book came about, because it's such perfect timing with the pandemic and so many people are in upheaval right now. Was it brought on because of the pandemic? I can't imagine you could have written a book that quickly and gotten it out the door. So what was the impetus for this book?
So the original model for the LifeQuake repurposing roadmap was written and published originally in 2009. And it was way before its time. I was talking about things that were going on in terms of the economy, even though, again, that was the prescient. I knew that was coming. And so the book came out at a time when it was dovetailing with what was going on in the culture. And that got me on a lot of outlets, media outlets, because, people needed guidance on getting through this big economic upheaval. But what was premature and is more relevant today is at the time I was talking about the connection between these personal lifequakes and the global ones. And my definition for lifequake, which is very different than everyone who's come after me. I coined this term in 1990, a very long time ago. People have taken it and used it in many different ways as just meaning crisis-driven transitions that sometimes or not lead to transformation. But my definition is the soul waking up to the next level of its evolution. And the way that often happens, because I often, will bring in quantum physics, and what we know from chaos theory is that when an organism has reached its highest potential, it bursts into chaos, so it can reorganize in a higher form. So what in Western society anyway, we don't have a framework for that. We want everything to be in harvest, to have a bull market forever, right? And as it applies to both on the global level and the personal level. And I saw these trends, and so I knew, because I'm an astrologer as well, that 2020 was going to be a big game changer. And I decided to do a 10-year anniversary. And what ended up happening was I gutted the book and brought in a whole lot of the updated neuroscience on resilience and change mastery. And because I'd interviewed 10 thought influencers for that first book who'd all been through a lifequake and come out with their mission on the other side, which is what my model helps you to do. In this book, I added 4 new people, Bill and Lynn Twist, who Lynn wrote The Soul of Money. She's one of Oprah's influencers. I interviewed Tama Keeves, who's also a New York Times bestselling author, and Marcy Shimoff, New York Times bestselling author. So I brought a lot of new stuff into this book and updated it, because literally as I was finishing the book, everything exploded. So then I added some things, that were relevant to the pandemic. So.
Wow. It's funny you mentioned Marcy Shimoff, because my wife, Orion, she's got the Stellar Life podcast. She just interviewed Marcy.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just talked to Marcy yesterday. She wrote the foreword to my book.
Oh,
so.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Very, very cool. So let's talk about how quantum physics and chaos theory and so forth, how they are so important to our lives and how things unfold, because a lot of people think of things like entanglement and the slit experiment and so forth as just theory or something that's in a science classroom or in a textbook and not part of our daily lives. And yet I've interviewed Amit Goswami. Do you know who that is?
Mm-mm.
Oh, he's a quantum physicist, and he was in What the Bleep Do We Know? He's just an amazing human, just
Yeah.
beautiful, beautiful soul. And he talks about the God particle and so forth. That was a great interview, by the way. Listeners, definitely check that episode out. So I'd love to delve a little bit more into this area of how quantum physics and personal development intertwine and meet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think if we go back in time, people like Greg Braden now and Bruce Lipton are becoming the rock stars of explaining the merging of spirituality and physics, and science. However, if you go back in time there were quantum physicists such as Fred Wolf. I don't know if that name, you probably never even heard of Fred Wolf.
No.
And yet Fred Wolf and Fritz, the Tao of Physics, what's his name, predated these guys many, many, many years ago. And they were explaining from a physicist's point of view how it's all energy, that this thing that we called woo-woo spirituality, indeed, it can be quantified. And when Kirlian photography was invented, we began to be able to see the etheric body, right? And much more study has been done through energy medicine that is showing that we can quantify so much of this. And in a way, that is what astrology does. If everyone's talking now about your frequency and the frequency you're putting out into the universe, right? Which began with What the Bleep and then went into The Secret and all of these other, books. But the planets have that same frequency. So the planets interchange with our frequency, and then life events happen as a result of that, both personally and globally.
So do you believe that we can influence world events? Like Abraham Hicks has said that we have the power to create worlds within us. How far does our power and our influence go?
Well, we are collective consciousness, so we are influencing world events, no question, based on the consciousness of enough people reaching critical mass, and it's an interesting time. There's a real division right now, not just on a political level, but there's a real division around consciousness, around how people perceive reality. What is reality? And there are those who are really perceiving reality through this prism of the quantum reality. And those people, are living more in fifth dimension reality, right? People who are really, I have to see it. I see it before I believe it kind of personality. That's, old physics. That's coming from old physics. Einstein was a great, I typically don't talk about this kind of stuff in interviews, but, he didn't know how to explain. He called it spooky physics.
Yeah. Spooky action at a distance was his explanation of entanglement.
Yeah. He didn't know how to explain it, and then people like Rupert Sheldrake came along and, brought the term morphic resonance into being. And so we started to understand how it is, like, for example, on two sides of the world before there was an internet, that people could invent the same thing at the same time, right? And then they'd have to give a Nobel Prize to two different scientists.
Right.
And the reason for that is that spooky physics,
Or twins, identical twins, can sense instantly when the other one is in danger or something has happened to them.
The very last chapter of my book, because I'm building a model for helping people change their consciousness from being crisis-driven as a way of making change to learning how to be able to anticipate, how to read for the signs, that it's time to make a change. Then, being able to discover what they're here to do next. But in the last, it's interesting, the last chapter of my book, when I was writing the first book, my editor said, I don't think people really care about making a difference in the world, because this chapter was about once you've learned how to master change, and you are actively using those principles in your life, then it's about becoming an agent of change for the world. And he said, and so the building element, because I had building elements that to master for each of these stages. So the building element of that stage was quantum altruism. And he said, I don't think people care about helping, really. I think most humans are pretty selfish. I said, I don't agree. So then I came up with, it was great because, sometimes having that friction makes you work harder at something. And so I gathered all the data on how altruism works and what it does across the world, that what we do here does affect. It's like the butterfly, that whole theory about
butterfly effect. Yeah. Butterfly flapping its wings in Beijing can change the weather half a world away.
So when we make a change, when we make a choice for personal transformation, and that's what I said, I've said when I talk about whatever's going on a political level at any point in time, is look inside and see where that's disowned in you. Because when you heal that, you do heal the world, So that's what critical mass, enough people take responsibility for their own shadow, then the whole world shifts.
Right. So one aspect of this could be looking at the other half of America, if you're an American, and see that they're not all wrong, they're not all bad, they're not selfish and hate the class that you're in. They just see things from a different perspective, and we all have light in us.
And they're not all the same reasons. If you really actually talk to people whose opinions about all forms of reality, what they're different, why they're voting for a particular person or whatever, they're different. For one person, it's I don't want to have enforced vaccinations. That's the only reason I'm voting for this person, And for someone else, it's something else. It's the economy, and they believe that somehow a particular candidate is going to save them in terms of the economy. So I do think we need to. The key is, I keep seeing the word, the color purple. Just focus on the color purple. It's the merging of red and blue. So.
All right. Smart. Okay. So how do we start down this path of awakening? Like, what would be a good next step for our listener?
To pay attention to the very first fundamental thing to me is to pay attention to what brings your energy up. When we're in a transition, and depending on the stages of that transition you're in, because they start with stage 1 is very subtle. It's just the boredom stage, that by paying attention to, because we tend to focus when we're in a funk or we're in a transition on what isn't working and what we just don't have any interest in because our life, we've outlived the form. So there's a tendency to focus on how dead everything is, or fear about that I can't pump myself back up again. So we use caffeine and alcohol and all kinds of things to try to get that endorphin high again and keep the life we have. But if you instead of trying to self-medicate, if you pay attention to where is my energy going up, and this is the big word, NOW, now, and not being in your story about what colors you liked and how you decorated your home or the kind of sports that you played, but really noticing what is bringing my energy up now? What am I fascinated with? What am I curious about on the most subtle levels? This will start to, if you start collecting data, and this is what I suggest, it's called connecting the dots exercise, is to start just keeping a list in your journal or on your computer or something of where does my energy go up? And so at the end of every day, doing an inventory, where did my energy go up today?
I like that. Do you have a journal that you keep that in, or do you just put it on your computer or your phone, or what?
I think if you're a journal person and you like the tactile nature of writing in a journal, which I recommend for dreams. I have all my clients keep a dream journal because I'm a Jungian-oriented, coach and therapist. So I have them keep a journal. I love the tactile nature, but that's not for everybody. Some people like to have an app, a notes app a file that they keep that is their journal on their computer. It's totally up to you. I think it has to do with where you're going to feel freest to express your true self.
Okay. And so let's say that you've been keeping a dream journal, and let's say for the sake of argument it's been in a notebook and you've been writing by hand. I guess the thing is, as soon as you wake up, you write the dreams down because they disappear kind of from your consciousness pretty quickly. So you have to write it down quickly as soon as you wake up.
If you're a person who doesn't remember dreams easily, there are a couple of things I recommend. First of all, before you go to sleep, date the next morning and write, I am remembering my dream, today. So when you wake up, don't move your head. There's something neurological about once we move our head that the dream just disappears. If you can stay in the state where the position that your neck and head is in, while awakening, you can then go back more easily into the dreams. And I actually also recommend really paying attention to the emotional tone. If there's more than one scene, the emotional tone progression of each scene.
Oh, right. So how do you get the notebook in your hand if it's over on the bedstand and you're not supposed to move your head or neck?
Because the first thing you do is you want to go back in so it becomes like, a neural pathway. So you go back through the dream step by step, whatever you can remember, so that it's firmly implanted in your brain. And then what I recommend is, because if you can keep your journal right next to your bed on your nightstand, so it's easy to get, once you have that kind of firmly anchored, then if you don't have a lot of time, and this is a technique that I think can help, is make circles on a page and just plant in the circles the characters from the dream, whoever animals, people, whatever that were in the dream, and then the emotional tone at the bottom. And then you can go back, and when you have a little time that night, for example, before you go to sleep, because that's another way of priming the pump for dream recall, is to put spokes, like the way a child would make the sun, put spokes out of each circle and then free associate. What do I associate to? A car, a Rolls Royce, because the nuances are important too, of what kind of car it is, what kind of dress were you wearing. I'm very subtle when I do this with my clients. We go very deep. So.
And what would be an example of something that you might, some epiphany or insight that you would get from a dream?
Well, there's a number of them. They can be forewarnings. I've been, in my own personal life, have been given forewarnings to make radical changes in my life. I moved out of California before everything went south, because I was guided to do that. And so you can also get creative inspirations from the dream time. Ideas can come to you, like if you put before there's some problem that you want solved, and you just write it down before you go to sleep at night, and you just ask for your higher wisdom to come through and give you some kind of a signal of, some mention. I had that experience actually around a dentist, believe it or not too long ago, where I was feeling some reservations about the dentist, and he was saying I needed a root canal and blah, blah, blah. And I just got this message in the dream time, go see this other dentist. So, which was, a lifesaver. So there are lots of ways that this can come through, but inspirations, many, many brilliant. I mean, Einstein will talk about that, the guy who invented the benzene ring, there's so many people have had downloads come through the dream time. So creative inspiration can come, so much guidance, because you're not limited to this reality. You're not in third dimension anymore. So you can go to what we think of as the future in the dream time. The soul can float and move in and out of dimensions, so we can tap into other dimensions of reality.
Wow, that's amazing. And so when you got that message about the dentist and about getting a second opinion on the root canal, I'm very glad that you did that, because I have a good friend who had a root canal, and it started her down this medical nightmare, which almost took her life, and she's still dealing with the repercussions of it. But she went to John of God multiple times and did all this healing work, and it's been a multiple year journey for her, just staying alive and trying to heal from this. And it turned into cancer in her jaw and her bone, and it just was major. So anyone listening who's thinking about a root canal or might in the future be faced with that choice, we can save your tooth. So that's a dead tooth. If they do a root canal, there is real health consequences potentially.
But I would caution, your viewers, because there are actually instances where a root canal is actually the necessary thing. Because when a tooth is dead, what happens is there's infection building in that tooth. So there are times when you do actually, there are situations where because I've had biological dentists, who don't believe in root canals, tell me there are times when that's really the only thing we can do, so that your body doesn't get filled with infection.
Okay. So get a second opinion if you're thinking of a root canal. Okay. So what would be an example of something that, an exercise that our listener could do to help them to help them to connect to their intuition, besides just journaling their dreams? Like, what would give them more access to things that would potentially show them future events or possible opportunities that they could go down?
So meditation definitely enhances the third eye and the pineal gland. So it's interesting when I saw that, that we needed to merge red and blue into purple. That is the color, of the third eye, and the energy of the sixth chakra. So sometimes what we need to do is to bring in a frequency, and the violet ray, for example, is a frequency that can clear out old habits and beliefs that are not serving you. So sometimes we have to do that first. We have to lift out your old story. And doing a practice in the morning where you get quiet and still and focus on the breath. I recommend chanting Om 13 times, because the vibration of it's the primordial sound of the universe. So the vibration of that settles the mind down. And when you get quiet like that, you can then ask the question by placing both hands over your heart. So you want to this is what heart math, has talked about as well. You want to bring the energy down from the brain into the heart. And by placing your hands over your heart, after you've settled the mind down through chanting, getting quiet enough to ask, what would you have me do about this particular issue, for example? What would you have me do about this today? What is, simple things. What is my next step today? People get very overwhelmed when they think about like their life transitions in terms of like a 5-year plan. And that's not how it works. It's about incrementally, so that you can manage your anxiety of being in the unknown. Yeah. And just asking the heart, what would you have me do today? Muscle testing, learning how to muscle test by using your fingers. There are YouTube videos on that. For any kind of question you have about a particular thing.
Yeah, we talked about that on the episode with Christian Michelson about muscle testing. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So what would you have me do today? Do you ask that every day of your higher power? You do that in the morning as part of your morning ritual, or how do you do it?
Yeah. Yes. It's the very first thing, I light a candle. I sometimes pull out the I Ching and put before a question about whatever it is that's up for me. Maybe just, what do I need to know today? But there could be a specific question that I have about that I'm facing that day. And then what I do with the I Ching is I just open it Sometimes I'll ask for the page number, and sometimes the answer comes through because it goes past the left brain and into my intuitive self. And then I'll just sit and do my breath work and sit in quiet and just concentrate on that, focus on that. The other thing that is the last piece I do, and I did that this morning, is to envision being a light. When we're in transition, there's a tendency to contract out of fear. And many, many, many people are in the unknown right now, in the world, on the world stage. So, and it's difficult for the mind to wrap its brain, itself around being in the unknown, being out of control. The ego wants to be in control. So one of the ways to help with that, managing that anxiety, is to drop into the heart and just envision yourself, expanding out. Before there was, things like social distancing and all of that went on during the pandemic, that began during the pandemic, I was telling people 6 feet out, expand your etheric body 6 feet out in every direction. And that this bubble of light around you as you go out into the world is like a shock absorber, because we are part of a collective consciousness. So whatever's going on in your city and wherever you have to interact, the places you're going into, you are at the effect. So if you instead of being at the effect, you effect the world by radiating light. So many things, divine coincidence is what I call them, what Jung called synchronicities, can happen to you in a very powerful way. So paying attention to those synchronicities guiding you. What are those breadcrumbs to follow?
Do you think that can happen across, let's say, a Zoom call or Skype call as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you're social distancing, you're doing your work from home thing, and you're on Zoom for all these meetings during the day, you can just work on elevating your consciousness, your frequency, and expand out that light and affect all the people you're going to be on a call with that whole day.
Yeah, because I have a number of clients who have had to move into a lot of Zoom as part of the paradigm, even working for big companies. And they have talked about how they're exhausted at the end of the day from sitting there and having to be so focused because everybody sees you, right? That focused on a call. And that, if you take enough meetings like that, it can be quite exhausting. Well, part of that is you're part of a collective consciousness. This is what we've been talking about in this, in this interview, is the morphic resonance. So, but you can change the frequency, not just for you, but for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, think about somebody who's really full of light or fun walks into a room full of people. They can, because of their charisma, what we used to call charisma. Now, the word that actually is more relevant is charism, if you want to look that one up, CHRISM. I talked about that in an Instagram post I did, which is much more soul generated than charisma. But you have that ability to have that, make a frequency shift for not for just you, but for everybody.
All right. So I do something as part of my morning kind of ritual and routine is I do the Anabacoa prayer, which is a Kabbalistic prayer. And I want to reveal light in things like podcast interviews and client meetings and all that sort of stuff. And it really makes a difference. It makes a big difference in my day and how much light I reveal, how much of a difference I make in the world.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, very cool.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, have you heard of this concept? I learned it from Bill Donius, who was a past guest on this show, and he calls it nondominant handwriting. And it's a way to access your right brain. And you spoke earlier about how you had something just kind of bypass the left brain, go right kind of to I don't know, forget exactly how you worded it, but that made me think about Bill Donius and this concept and the practice of getting in a meditative state, kind of asking your right hemisphere to weigh in on an issue or to help guide you on something and help you prioritize your to-do list for the day or what have you, and just closing your eyes, having that intention, and squeezing the pen in your hand, it would be my left hand because I'm right-handed. Then just writing, not worrying about how messy it is, you get completely different answers than what you would normally write down in your dominant hand. I'm curious if you've ever heard of this exercise before.
Oh yeah, it's been around forever.
Okay.
There was a book written probably 30 years at least ago on that technique, and that's certainly relevant. It's sometimes not as helpful to left-handed people as it is to right-handed people, because when you're right-handed, so what you're doing is you're opening up the more intuitive center, with if you're right-handed. So
right, because your left hemisphere controls the right side of your body, and your right hemisphere controls the left side of your body. Yep. Cool. This is fun. Okay, so why don't we talk about how money and like financial abundance and the economy and things that are going on right now for people, how that has a soul connection for folks, because a lot of people feel like they have this idea of like, I don't know, spirituality, religion, or what have you, or being a good person, and then in this other box there's this other idea of, well, I got to pay the bills. Like that's the reality of today, is I have to make enough money to pay the rent. And those two things actually are not in separate boxes. They're very integrated, and so I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I think it generates from inside, So I talk about a term I coined called financing the soul. That we have our own economy inside our bodies, and the degree to which we are depositing versus withdrawing from that economy affects our health. And what affects our health affects our brain, affects our thinking, affects our frequency. So really looking at everything in terms of, like, the people you have in your life, do they add to my life? Are they making deposits in my bank account? Are the activities I'm doing, including things that are quote unquote altruistic, the charities that you are donating time to, does that actually give you joy? Because there's going to be a resonance with certain things and not with others, and that's okay. Not everybody's meant to feed the homeless, that may not be your thing. It may be, pediatric oncology ward, that is meant to be your thing. So finding those activities that really make deposits in your inner bank account. And that includes food. I always like eating things, whether they're supplements or real food, that give me more bang for my buck than just like one thing, that have antioxidants and protein and, a bunch of things, all so that you're constantly looking at, you talk about biohacking, that whole principle of how do you get the most from your life and what you bring into your life.
Right. So I've heard the term emotional bank account many times, but I haven't heard it referred to your own, like feeding your own soul, or that's brilliant. I mean, it just makes so much sense. Like, it's not just in relationships with others, it's in relationship with yourself.
Absolutely. Thoughts you think really will drain you, or will, create, more mitochondria, basically, more ATP.
Now, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the shadow self. And like, I see it as something that allows you to grow because you have contrast and you have something to push against. Like the ego isn't bad; it exists for a purpose, and a very important purpose, so that we can kind of grow and evolve. And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about the shadow and about ego.
Well, that's a whole subject in and of itself. Again, we just talked. It's funny. We're going back from. We started with talking about the last chapter of my book, Stage 7, which is the whole altruism, and what we do affects the world. Then we went to Stage 6, which was the having to how do you create abundance from this kind of new consciousness, and now Stage 4 is when I talk about the shadow, and I call it this. This is the time. As it applies to being in transition specifically, it's a great time to be doing shadow work when you don't have a job yet, or you've just left a marriage and you don't have a lot of structure. There's a tendency to get really scared, and I've got to create a structure in my life. This is the time to do this work because it's what I call the cosmic barbecue. The ego is meant to go through a purification. It's meant to let go of an old identity. And that's hard for some humans. If you believe that your outer identity is who you are, it can feel like, people can feel suicidal, like, oh, there's really nothing left for me. So doing this deep excavation work, I call it going into the cellar of your consciousness. And I have exercises, I take people through in my online course. I did a whole exercise on my CD, that's on my website right now, has this exercise because it's so important to go into the cellar of your consciousness. Because when we think of the shadow, most people think of it as the evil side of us, the dark side. Whereas in Eastern thought, dark is the inner, dark is the hidden, it's the feminine, It's the moon time. It's the inner experience. So it's really about, when I think of the cellar, I think of where we keep, rare wines, right? We keep them out of the light so that they can mature. And the same thing may be true with hidden talents, things that we've hidden away that we're ashamed of even. There are humans. I interviewed a woman for this online course. Her name is Tama Keeves, and she wrote a book called Thriving Through Uncertainty. And her shadow self that she was keeping hidden while being a lawyer, a Harvard-trained lawyer in a Boston law firm, was that she wanted to write, and to her, because her family construct was writers starve. You don't want to be a writer. So she had to bury that. So when I work with people individually, or in Zoom classes that I give, I have people do this, like just going into the cellar and calling out, bring in a key light, which is from the divine, and then calling out who wants to come from the shadow, who wants to come out of the shadow parts of the cellar that want to give you a voice, want to speak to you. And so I do a whole exercise that includes, spiritual guides coming in and making contact and giving a voice to these parts that we've had shame around.
Wow.
Shame is not just about bad things we've done. People think that's just about, sometimes we have shame about really things we have aspirations to do, but are afraid of, because it may, if you have golden handcuff syndrome, it may mean letting go of the benefits and the IRA and all of that stuff. So,
yeah. Marianne Williamson has this great quote about what we're really afraid of is that we're more powerful than we can possibly imagine, something like that. It's a beautiful quote. Yeah, I'm sure you've heard it.
Yes, and Mandela and the Dalai Lama have had their own versions of that, of getting out of the way, and letting your light shine.
Yeah. So we'll include at least one or two of these quotes into the show notes for this episode.
Great.
So I'd like to hear a little bit more about spiritual guides. Like, are these angels? Are they like people who have lived in the past? Are they your inner being or your higher self? Like who are these spiritual guides in your estimation or from your experience?
I think that's evolved for me. I was raised a Catholic, and so my early mystical experiences were with angelic guides. What I now know is, and this is for me, I respect, when I work with someone, just like Jung did, I really move into the construct of that person. If you were raised Jewish and within Judaism and studied the Kabbalah, I go from that point of view, of respecting that person's point of view. In both Christianity and Judaism, there is the concept of angels, right? Mm-hmm. And I believe now, because of how much I've studied quantum physics and parallel universes and have done a lot of work, wonderful, what's his name? This wonderful chiropractor I did some brilliant work with. Matrix Energetics is his work. And that was the beginning of my realizing that there are different parallel universes, and there is a you that exists in a parallel universe that is a higher version of you. And so we think of that, in this reality as our future self. And so when I with someone, what I will do is I'll say, there is a you that has been more fully potentiated than the you that exists right now. Just like if you go back 5 years or 10 years and you think about all that you've learned, who you've become, you're a higher version than the you that existed 10 years ago. So what we're doing now, so it's not woo-woo, because I work with a lot of men and I do some business coaching. And so I use things that are really tangible. And there's been enough science fiction films for people to understand this now, that it's just about multidimensional reality. So we're going to call in this you that exists in another universe, who actually knows how to heal the body, that knows how to write this book you've wanted to write. We're going to collapse time. So there's an energetic point that I put in the heart with an energetic point out in space into a parallel universe. And we're going to just welcome in that you that exists in a different dimension of reality that is more masterful than the you that exists right now. And so you can quicken, that's how you accelerate one's consciousness.
Yeah, that sounds very similar to something I've learned from Donnie Epstein, who was a guest on this show as well, and a friend of mine. It's where you exchange versions for a higher kind of dimensional version of yourself in another, another universe. And if you exchange versions with that more adept or more loving or more skilled version, you get to skip the hard slog of doing all that work to get to that point. Yes, very similar.
See, my own personal network has their way of doing it, and I love network. I think it's an amazing form of chiropractic. But for me, because I'm more Jungian, I believe in merging, that there is an alchemy, led into gold, so that when you take golden enlightenment and you merge it with your dense consciousness, whatever those karmic samskaras are, they use that term in Sanskrit, those old patterns that you're bringing in, soul imprints. When you merge the light with those patterns, then an alchemy takes place. I don't want to deny anything, because I know inside the shadow, inside the things that we think are our saboteurs, are actual gifts.
Right. Yep. Yeah, my wife says there's always a gift. It's just the bow might be on the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah. If you think about it, it's like I was watching something that was, was about, history, and I thought, what would happen if certain people didn't do certain things? There would have been no history. If certain, like without Hitler, a lot of Jews wouldn't have come to America. There's a bizarre upper thing, flushing out anti-Semitism, all these things that had to come to the surface, that atrocities bring the light. When the darkest stuff is brought to the surface, then the light can come forward too. and how the world has shifted based on wars and things like that, that it has made people go to different parts of the planet. So without that antagonist, the protagonist has no journey.
Yeah, and there's a higher dimensional reality. There's a bigger picture that we can't see. So something that feels like just a travesty or a tragedy is actually a gift, because it got you to where you are now and made you the amazing person that you are. Yeah.
Right. One of the exercises I give is to, on that note, is in stage 5, is to make a list of all your successes. Then make a list of all what you have thought of as failures. And then write about what you learned from each of these experiences, from your successes and from your failures. And it is my belief that you will find that you learned a hell of a lot more from your supposed challenges, and failures than you ever learned from succeeding. They're wonderful. Successes are fantastic, but we don't grow and learn a lot from them. They're just wonderful, ways of keeping us in the human body, So I don't know. In my life, I can tell you that my greatest growth spurts have come during my darkest moments, darkest challenges.
Yeah, me too. All right. Well, we're about out of time, I know. So if we could leave our listener with one final nugget, some gem of brilliance or insight, what would it be?
Well, I try to come up with something different each time. It's something that just comes from the intuitive rather than anything canned. But what popped up, is to be courageous enough to be willing to listen to what you're being called to. Even if it doesn't feel like what that is yet, just the willingness to be willing to listen and step outside the old box. That willingness, that I'm willing to be in the unknown. I'm willing to be the question of I don't know, will open up from that place of I don't know, and you're as an empty vessel, you open to people coming in to help you, dreams coming in to help you. If you're full tank with all your I already know everything self, there's no room. So you have to be able to empty everything out to be this empty vessel so that the new can come in and support you.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Toni. This was a wonderful, illuminating, inspiring interview and episode. How do people get to your courses and to learn more from you, get coaching from you? Where should we send them to?
LifeQuake.com has a lot of the products that I've created for people. It also has articles on it. My website, drtonigalardi.com. I don't know if that'll be in Chiron or not, but from my website, drtonigalardi.com. There's also on drtonigalardi.com an opportunity for $25 a month, become a member of the LifeQuake Soul Tribe. And then I give a healing activation with 2 different, once a month on the new moon, that helps people clear out old stuff so that they can actually begin to realize their dreams in the new energy. So yeah, those are the 2 ways to, there's a lot of material there, a lot of content that's free. So
fabulous. Thank you, Toni. Thank you so much. And listener, please take some positive action from this. I mean, if you listened all the way to the end, I know you're on a similar wavelength. So get out there and reveal some light and be the light for many others. And we'll catch you on the next episode.